I'm stoked to share my guest with you today. I found her through reading her books as well as watching her YouTube videos, where she shares amazing insights into counselling, theology, and psychology. She is so practical, and how she teaches and what she shares is so applicable to our lives. I just had to get her on the show. Jennifer Jules Schweiger, LPC, is an author, speaker, TV host, professional counselor, musician, wife, mother, lover of Jesus, and friend to many. Jennifer has a master's degree in mental health counselling from Capella University and is due to soon have her doctoral degree in community counselling from Liberty University. She has spoken all over the world, written 14 books, and hosted 2 TV programs. She loves to communicate the fascinating intersection between theology and psychology. She does so whenever and however she gets the chance, and I am happy to have her on the show so we have a chance to discuss. Welcome, Jennifer. You have been on my top guest list since I started thinking about doing this podcast. So thank you so much for being here. I'm really honored.
Oh, it's so cool to be here. I've been very curious about you as well.
Awesome.
We're stalking each other.
Exactly. So yeah, I found you on YouTube when I was going through my own personal growth and healing journey. I can't remember what exactly I typed in, but I came across just some of your videos about how to deal with certain psychological issues, which we can go into more later. But if you can just take the ball and just tell us who you are and a bit of your story about how you've become a counselor.
Okay. Well, I started out a young person. I went through some significant traumas as a young person that I think have directly or indirectly led me to seek the counseling field as a profession. So one of the things that happened was my family moved when I was 10 years old. And we moved from a little country town where I knew pretty much everyone else, and I had best friends, and everybody was friendly, and we were all kind of similar to each other, to a much more cosmopolitan, much more sort of strident kind of feel in a local elementary school. And kids from different backgrounds, wealthier kids, and the kids were just overall more intense and much more kind of jaded than where I came from. And as a result of some playground drama, I ended up at one point being sexually and physically assaulted by a group of girls that accused me of trying to steal this girl's boyfriend. And the fact was that I had never even spoken to the boy. I was terrified of him. He was like the cool kid, you know. And so I'd never even talked to him, but it was just a false accusation because when people want to do something mean, they have to work themselves up somehow. So that's what they did. And they drugged me out to this baseball diamond, and this is away from where the teachers could see. And they basically sexually and physically assaulted me, these girls, with the whole playground watching, guys, girls, everybody huddled around watching this horrible thing happen. So it's obviously extremely humiliating. I was a adolescent right at that age where I'm just starting to develop, and I remember exactly what I was wearing. I had this beautiful blue and green striped sweater dress that was kind of form-fitting and really pretty, and it made me look feminine and attractive. And they yanked that thing up and they just attacked me. You know, it was just really horrible. So I was pretty devastated afterward. But the thing was that the administration of the school, they knew what had happened. They saw it. They saw the grass matted in my hair. They knew how nasty these kids were. They knew something had happened, but they did nothing about it. So, you know, what you do at that age when something so horrible happens is you stuff those emotions, and you just think they're going to go away if you throw them in the lake and put up a no fishing sign. Well, a few years later, I kind of recovered socially from that horrific experience. And I went to high school. I went to a very large high school, 2,500 students. It was actually the high school that Oprah Winfrey went to for a while. And so it was a big school, lots of kids, lots of different demographics, a very interesting place. And when I first went, my best friend, let me back up a minute. I had a best friend named Sue Cook. And another kind of traumatic experience that actually happened before I went to high school is we accidentally, no joke, burned her house down. We were smoking,
What?
yes, we were smoking cigarettes in her living room. Her parents were
Wow.
gone, and we got scared and we dropped the cigarette and it went into the couch and we thought it would just go out. We poured water. It didn't. It burned the house. We left and then the house burned while we were gone. And her parents were going through a divorce, so there was tremendous guilt. When
Yeah.
you're a kid, you think you're responsible for everything. So I thought, oh, maybe that's why they got divorced. But we ended up getting found out. So this is a very dear friend of mine, and we've been through thick and thin together. Well, she moved away. And so when she moved away, I was pretty much left friendless. And then right at the same time, I enter this huge social forum of this new high school, and my best friend is gone. So I don't really have any connections anywhere. And I become a major wallflower and like a nobody in this school. And so I got really deeply into the Hobbits, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which I read long before they got popular with a friend of mine named Jim. We rode the bus together and we would talk about the Hobbits and the Lord of the Rings and all that stuff. That was my world. That was my reality because I had nothing in actual reality. So I escaped into that. And it was very actually helpful to me at that rough time of my life. But eventually, I started to come out of my shell a little bit. And on one weekend, I met a guy on a ski trip a bunch of students went on. And this guy was like one of the gorgeous guys in the class, that all the girls wanted to
Mm.
date. And he and I ended up talking and talking on a very meaningful, substantial, deep level and spending a lot of time skiing together. And I was starting to wonder toward the end of the weekend, just how does he feel about me? And then, true confessions here, we were sitting in a circle passing a joint around the circle. And in order to recycle the marijuana smoke, he took my chin in his hand and breathed the smoke into my mouth. So that was kind of
How
like,
romantic.
I know. That was a swift one, but
Yeah.
so then I thought, well, maybe there is some interest. But anyway, we went back to the high school, and he had a girlfriend already, and I didn't know about it. But I found out, was this beautiful girl that was, a lot of the high school students were Jewish, and I'm sorry, but the chosen people. They got something and they got some secret sauce in their genetics because they were better looking than the average. They were better athletes. They were smarter. They just had that edge. So she was one of those really pretty,
Oh
Jewish
dear.
girls, and I was just like, oh, my goose is cooked. This guy is out of reach. He's got his beautiful Jewish girlfriend. This is not happening. Well, little did I know that he was actually going back to the girl and saying to her, um, I met someone and I'm actually interested in this other person. And amazingly enough, the girl's reaction was, okay, it's all right, no big deal. And I really don't think she cared. I don't, maybe she did, but anyway, so little did I know this was all happening. And then he and I sat next to each other in an assembly. And by the time we left the assembly, we were holding hands. And that was like just a huge thing for me because I'd like gone from being this total wallflower with nothing going for me to like dating this really special guy. And the girls kept walking up to me. They'd see us holding hands walking down the hall. The girls kept coming up and going, "Are you dating Rick Kagan?" And they couldn't believe it. And I was like, yeah, like
Mm.
I can't explain it. But so we ended up dating for the better part of 3 years. And, as much as that was a triumph in one way, in another way, it was just really way too much, too soon, too fast. I mean, when you're
Mm.
16, 15, 16, 17 years old, you're not ready for a serious relationship. And
Yeah.
so he ended up, it just gets a little complicated because drugs were really big then. And I felt reticent to do any kind of hard drugs. I think I smoked pot, but I didn't want to do hard drugs. And he was really into LSD. He and his friends would take LSD a lot. And I started pressuring him to stop, and he finally did. But then his friends turned around and pressured him to not only start doing LSD again, why are you letting your girlfriend tell you what to do kind of thing, but they would start pressuring him to have sex with me. And I was not ready for that. And it wasn't even from like a Christian standpoint because I didn't consider myself a Christian, but I was just like scared. That was a big step. So long story short, he dumped me in the middle of the 3 years that we dated, but we ended up after about a year. I went through severe depression after that because he was
Mm.
my world. I had built my world around him. And so
Yeah.
I ended up with no friends, nothing again, and went through this really lonely period. But then at the end of that, we ended up dating again. And the second time around, I broke up with him because I just kind of lost interest. And I thought at that time that love was feeling. And that
Yeah.
if the feelings dissipated, which they always do, but I didn't know that,
Mm.
the feelings
Mm.
dissipated, that meant you didn't love the person. So
Yeah.
he was really broken the second time. And I was broken too because I didn't want that to happen. I didn't want to do that to another person. But those three experiences scarred me, and I didn't know it really at the time. So then
Yeah.
the first year of college, I, through a series of events, became a Christian. I was very deeply involved in New Age stuff and Eastern religions and meditated every day and attended every kind of like meeting at an ashram I could find. I was always, looking into researching and curious about Eastern religions because they sounded more legit to me than Christianity. I actually had an experience. This wasn't a
Wow.
particularly traumatic experience, but the pastor of my church, when I was running around with my friends as a teenager, I saw him in a gas station and he came up to me and he took my hand, and the guy was obviously drunk. I could smell the alcohol, and he was like,
What, the pastor was drunk?
yes. And he was like massaging
Wow.
like fondling my hand, and he was telling me I was one
Oh
of his favorites, and it
dear.
was just creepy. So
Oh.
I remember after that happened, I said to myself, Christianity is all a big lie. When you're a kid, you just
Mm-hmm.
generalize and you think in black and white. That's what I did. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try to find a different religion. And that's somewhat how I got into the Eastern stuff. So at the point when I'm in college, the first year of college, I'm surrounded with people that think that way. And it's this very experimental college where anything goes. They had a huge contingency of militant lesbian feminists. They had witches and warlocks. And this was back in the
Wow.
70s. So it was a while
Mm.
ago, but it's just really sort of wild place in a lot of ways and very libertarian and free or libertine, I should say, and free. And you could just, whatever you wanted to do, that was fine. So I'm in that context, in that environment, and I start to feel kind of scared like this is too much freedom. I've been pushing back against my parents' rules and against Christianity and everything for so long because I want freedom, but this freedom is getting to me. It's kind of scary. And so I ended up really kind of craving some order and some boundaries in my life, not even realizing it really. And toward the end of the school year, some people came to my house that had subletted the house. We lived in a farmhouse. It was a college that was in kind of an area where there were a lot of farms. And so a lot of students lived in farmhouses. So I had subletted this farmhouse from these people, and they came back during a party that we had thrown. And they had been through something. You could tell by looking at them. They had little
Mm.
buttons on that said Jesus saves, and they were different. And so I
Mm.
sat down, like I remember like looking at them and thinking, I don't want to talk to them. They're weird, they're Jesus freaks. But then I think the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, you have been open to everything. You've tried it. And I had tried, Sheila, I had tried everything, like anything I could get my hands on that was spiritual. I tried it,
Yeah.
everything, like weird
Mm.
stuff. And because
Mm.
I was in that environment where you can do anything. And I said, you know, so basically the Spirit said to me, you've tried everything, at least hear them out. And so I sat down with them. They were sitting all by themselves at this table. And I went over and sat down and said, all right, tell me about Jesus. Because I knew that's what they wanted to do. And they started talking. And the funny thing is, I was really into astrology at the time. So I'm a Pisces. And I really relate to being a Pisces because I'm an excellent swimmer. And I grew up in water and pools and always swimming. And so I really loved fish. And the first thing the girl said when I said, tell me about Jesus, is she said, it's like the water of life. You keep drinking. And she just goes into this metaphor about water. And I was like,
Beautiful. Mm.
wow, the
Mm.
Lord knew my language. So we ended up talking a lot, and they took me to church. And long story short, I gave my heart to Jesus in the middle of this very secular college campus and lost almost all my friends. So I ended up, long story short, joining a church. And I ended up with the Seventh day Adventist Church because I was already a vegetarian because I had come to believe in reincarnation in high school. And so my grandmother died, and I thought, my grandma dies, I don't want to eat her, I want to
Oh,
just,
dear.
you know what I mean? So
Yes.
I was already a vegetarian, and I loved being plant-based, and I'm still plant-based, and I love it. And so I related to that. And the Adventists that I met were really into health and nature and all that stuff. So
Can
um,
I take a little bit of a little path off the story, just
sure.
so that I can understand, and also the audience? I'm not actually 100% sure what the Adventists are. Is it you meet on Saturdays? What are your basic beliefs?
Yeah, it's a Christian denomination that's the same, basic gospel that everybody preaches. With different twists and turns of theology, every denomination has their own emphases and things, but the basic Christian gospel, except that the Seventh day Adventist Church, and the reason it's called Seventh day Adventist is because we keep the seventh day, which we believe to be the biblical Sabbath, and we also believe in the soon coming of Jesus, and
Yes.
that's why the Adventist. So, and there's a sort of an emphasis on the soon coming. Not that we're setting dates and stuff, but just there's
An
this,
awareness of it.
and they call it eschatology, which is the grand sweep of time and how it ends with all things
Wow.
come. With Jesus coming, it begins this next phase that starts the
Yes.
millennium, and then the judgment, and then the new earth, and all that stuff that you read about in Revelation. So Adventists are really into the prophecies, and I think our prophetic interpretations are really solid. I've actually dug into them
Mm,
myself. So
mm.
I'm completely ignorant of what's in the Bible, but I meet these people that are plant-based and they're into nature, and then there's Christianity in the same package, and I just think this is what I've been looking for. So I ended up joining,
Wow.
and
Wow.
then so I go down the road, and I'm doing great, and I'm real involved in ministry, and I was involved with health food, natural vegetarian restaurants in big cities in Chicago and
Mm,
New York and different places. It was a lot of fun. It was really cool. I was young and kind of crazy and loved those ministries. I ended up getting married when I was 22, and my husband was also really into ministry, and we did tree planting for a while in the West and then came back, and we would do classes on how to eat healthy. We were really into health, and we just were involved in a
mm,
lot of ministry. At a certain point, I had had kids, and I would say the rush and fun and vigorous activity of my 20s pretty much distracted me from unprocessed trauma. But then
mm.
once I hit my 30s, and I find this as a counselor that a lot of people can they can bury their stuff during their 20s, but it's
Yes.
when when they get
Yes.
like into
I
the
know
30s
that.
and 40s that they hit the wall and they can't
Mm.
run anymore. So that's kind of what happened to me. So I have two little kids by this time. I'm a homeschooling mom. I was really dedicated to my kids and raising them well. And I was probably overprotective because of what I had been through on the playground. Public school, like, to me, was terrifying, and for the reasons that I've shared with you. So I was probably overly protective and sheltering of them. Anyway, I'm home with these kids. I'm really dedicated to being with them and to raising them right and all that, and giving them everything I didn't feel like I had. And I got hit with depression, like, pretty hard.
Mm.
And I also started to have some health problems. I'm a singer, I have a background in music. I don't do a lot of music anymore because I've had a lot of vocal problems. So the vocal problems started around that time, having to do with health conditions. And I just felt like God had yanked the rug out from under me. I felt betrayed by God during that time.
Mm.
So the depression came down in force upon me. And I was dealing with suicidal thoughts. I was dealing with complete just coming unglued. It was really heavy, and I had
And this was in
never.
your 30s,
And
did you
I'm in my
say?
30s, yeah,
Yeah.
early 30s, yeah. It was a
Yeah.
very difficult time for me. And I would say that I continued to struggle. I went ups and downs through my 30s. I'm not going to tell you how old well, I'm in my 60s now, so I'm old, but I went
You're
through,
looking good.
thank you. I went through 30s and 40s, up and down somewhat, but still off and on struggling with depression. And then once I got into my later 40s, my kids launched and were ready to kind of live on their own. And I wanted to do something professional with my life. It's really hard for women that have raised children to reinvent themselves. A lot of times you feel, and this is a lot of women I'm speaking for, you have done everything. You've poured yourself into your kids, and it's such an emotionally rich experience to raise children that you just feel like, what else can I do? Especially if you
Wow.
don't keep your professional skills up to date, or whatever, or you don't have your face in the workplace, you'd start and you don't look as good as you used to when you were young, and you don't have as much energy. Going back and reinventing yourself is a big hurdle for women. So I knew that I needed to do something. So I went back to school for counseling at that time. And through studying counseling and through actually my income improving a little bit, I think that was part of it. And I think also being in a position to have to be strong for other people, those three
Mm.
things I would say: the knowledge I gained of psychology, a better job, really, because being a musician is hard. It's
Yes.
so
Being a
creatively
creative
fulfilling
is hard.
that hardly anybody can make a living at it. So,
Yeah.
and I didn't do that well. So, on the financial part, I loved it, and then the other thing is just becoming part of, society, and providing a service and being strong for other people was, I think, really good for me. And by the grace of God, I was able to, learn how to manage the depression. And I can honestly say, I just did a anxiety and depression workshop last night. I had like 25 people there that paid to come hear me
Wow.
talk about these things. And I
Wow.
can honestly say, I am not depressed. I
Wow.
go down when I have a crisis, but that's just normal
Yes.
human ups and downs. I don't wrestle with depression every day. And I should be depressed now because I'm getting old, but I'm not.
Good. Hope for us all then. So, hey, your story is so amazing, and so you've come through this whole journey of life. You're at a point now where you're a counselor, and are you still studying? Did you mention?
I'm in a doctoral program, so I'm trying to get a doctoral in counseling with a concentration in traumatology. So yeah, working on it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, amazing. So with your experience then from being a Christian and maybe not looking, sorry, do I call you a Christian or an Adventist?
Oh yeah,
Adventist, is
no,
it all
you
the
could call me
same?
a
Is
Christian.
it
It's the same. I
okay?
mean, to
It's
me,
the
it's
same.
yeah.
Okay. It's all
I'll
the
answer
same to me
either
as
of
well.
them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess it's well, for me, my story I've shared a little bit with you off recording. Also trauma in the past, and got to my mid-20s where nothing was really processed because you almost don't realize it. You're just like, well, I forgive, I forget, I move on type of thing. But all that stuff does need to be processed. You've learned how to, I guess you've learned tools and keys on how to process your depression.
Mhm.
And what I would love for you to just share potentially is just, the psychological issues that we can deal with. And maybe you can pick out a couple, maybe that have really been impactful for your life, and then what we can do to get out of that place.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I'll just touch, on the fact that I actually found you because I was searching. I was in a tough place, and I was just searching on YouTube, and I came across your 7 deadly psychological sins, which is
Of
quite
course.
a capturing title, really.
Uh-huh.
So I went through some of those, and maybe you can touch on a couple of those
Yeah, I'd be happy
specifically.
to. I'm going to pull up the list here actually because I've forgotten what all of them are. But 7 deadly psychological sins are things that we do that tend to, um, you know, cause disruption, dysfunctionality, harm in our lives. And so I have 2 series. I have the 7 deadly psychological sins, which are things we do personally. And then I have the 7 deadly relationship sins, which are things we do in the context of relationships. There's a
Mm.
lot of crossover between the two. But one of the big ones, and I'll list them off right now: criticism, complaining, self pity, worry, avoidance, emotionalism, and bitterness. Okay, so let me pick out one that was really a big one for me, and that was self pity. I'm a melancholic personality. I'm very artistic and creative. I feel very deeply. I'm a sensitive human being. I bond very deeply with people, but that means when relationships go sour, I'm really impacted by it. So
Yes, I can very much relate.
And because I feel so deeply, it's very easy for me to be really wounded by things. And then in my ignorance of how to deal with those wounds, I started turning inward and feeling sorry for myself and cherishing those feelings of self pity. And what I have realized is what we do when we're hurt is we develop what we call an external locus of control because you get hit with something. It happens from the outside, it affects you. Like those girls beating up, I did nothing to make that happen. That was totally the outside coming at me. Um, and there will be things that we cannot control. I don't like the whole idea of what do they call it? The miracles thing where you imagine things happening and then they happen. You know that whole thing. I don't like
Yes,
that
yes, it's a
because
whole movement. Yeah,
yeah,
like
it
yes,
ends up being that anything bad that happens is because I made it happen by my karma or whatever. I don't believe that. I think that there are random events that harm people that came out of zero, nowhere. And
yeah,
but what happens with an external locus of control is that then we conclude that everything is outside of my control because some things are outside of my control. Therefore, everything is outside of my control. Whereas what is really the case is we may have a lot of horrible things outside of our control. Think of someone in the Holocaust. Everything is taken from them that can be taken from a human being. Think of Black people in the United States during slavery and Jim Crow. Just about every human comfort was taken from people. It was horrific. The inhumanity that people exercise upon one another. But the reality is that even in dire circumstances, we have the ability to choose how we're going to respond to them. In other words, there's still that locus of that internal locus of control where we can say, I may not be able to control this, but I control what I do in response to it. And so with the external locus of control comes self pity because, oh, life just happens to me and I have no control. Whereas what I learned was, this is unfortunate what has happened. What are my options now? What am I going to do?
Welcome to Grow Your Dreams. I'm Shaylin Fair and I'm a sunflower, still growing, and my content is here to help other flowers like you blossom too. From emotional health to mental health to the dream that you have in your heart that you are desperate to bring into reality, I'm here to encourage you, inspire you, and provide you practical tools on how to flourish. I have a podcast called Grow Your Dreams over on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I've just finished a series all about temperaments. If you want to live at a deeper level, to know yourself and to also understand those people closest to you, a really, really helpful tool is to understand your own temperament, what makes you tick emotionally, mentally, how you process things internally, and also to understand those closest to you. It's going to help you so much. So I want to point you over to Grow Your Dreams podcast. Go subscribe on those channels, listen to those interviews with John Sparks, and you are going to bless. This content is going to help you flourish and it's free. This is 40 years of research, counselling, book writing that John Sparks has done. It's helped me on a real personal level and I wanted to help you too. So go over, check it out. Now, if you like this interview, I would really love to know, what did you find helpful about the interview? Comment below, like, subscribe, click that little bell notification, and let's start a conversation. I look forward to hearing from you and you will hear back from me.
So one of the things I say to people that have experienced trauma is it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. What are you going to do with this horrible thing that happened? How are you going to deal with it? What are the options? Let's sit down and look at the options. You can get really basically better from it. There's a whole field of study called post-traumatic growth, or you can get bitter from it. You can learn to forgive, you can process, do whatever it takes, see a counselor, whatever it takes to heal, and then move on and make sure that that horrific experience becomes something that will minister to others through you, or you can continue to cherish self-pity, victim mentality, blaming, and revenge and resentment and all the things that tend to come in the package and become bitter. So I think that was a real turnaround for me when I realized, wow, I can't affect the things that are around me, but I can choose how I respond to them. So responsibility
Mm.
taking is a really big part of like healing and growing up.
Mm.
So that's just one example. Let me ask you this: which ones did you relate to of the seven deadly?
I can relate very much to be a melancholic. I'm deeply melancholic myself. So self-pity, and I would say emotionalism
Uh
has
huh.
been a big, one of my big challenges really in life, to not be so controlled by emotions, because I do feel so deeply and so strongly. And and also because maybe with my history and how I can naturally default into thinking negatively, if something is happening to me, it becomes very much shifting into this external locus of control,
Yeah.
forgetting that I can choose not to be controlled by my emotions and how I'm what I'm
Yeah.
feeling from the situation. So
Yeah.
talk into emotionalism, please.
Yeah, that's good. And so that was like a really big one for me too, actually, with the depression. So what emotionalism does, and in cognitive behavioral therapy, it's called emotional reasoning. So it goes like this: if I feel it, it must be real.
Yes.
And we have to watch for this as women. And some of the talk that I hear, like in the women's groups and Me Too, these just like these groups of women that really value intuition and gut reactions to things, is an over trusting in our intuition and gut reactions that amounts to
Mm.
emotional reasoning. You know,
Mm.
just like rational thought, just like reasoning itself, it's flawed because it's human. And so there are limits of how much that can do for you. The same is true of intuition. We may have strong senses of something, but that the function of intuition is a lower brain function. So it's your amygdala and your limbic system at work, and you're picking stuff up. What the limbic system is really good at is its impressions. What it's bad at is precision, is really bad at precision.
Mm.
So you may sense that there's something wrong, but you don't know exactly what it is. And so you need to understand, if you are a highly intuitive person, that there are limits to what
Yes.
intuition will tell you. It may tell you something is wrong, but it won't necessarily tell you exactly what's wrong.
Mm.
So that's where emotional reasoning kind of falls flat, is where you assume that everything you feel is true. So let me give you some examples. I feel like there's nothing to look forward to in my future. That's a classic presentation in depression. We believe that the dopamine circuits are affected, and dopamine is the reward seeking system in the brain. And so when a person completely loses the ability to look forward to anything, that's a dopamine issue usually, or we
Mm.
think so. um, but then to assume, on the basis of that chemical change in the brain and the emotions it drums up, that there really is nothing to look forward to, is assuming too much based on the evidence that you have.
Mhm.
A lot of mature,
Yes.
solid thinking is just like, is are my conclusions proportionate to the evidence? You don't want to have too much of a conclusion based on too little evidence. Another presentation of emotional reasoning or emotionalism is, if I feel guilty, I am guilty.
Mhm.
And I think if you are involved in a cult, like you and I've talked about, you probably
Mm.
ran into this, where they would
Yes.
manipulate your conscience, right?
Oh, absolutely. I could feel guilty, by choosing the wrong color to wear, or, if I felt that was the wrong color to wear, so definitely.
And then you think you are guilty on the basis of the feeling itself.
Yes.
Um, and another one is, I don't feel love for my family member right now. They irritate me right now. I don't love them.
Mm.
Well, just having a moment where you just really want to kick them out does not mean you don't love them. It just means that you have a
Mhm.
moment where you want to kick them out. So
Mhm.
not taking too much conclusion, or assuming too much of a conclusion based on the evidence of emotion alone. Emotions are like children. They can give you important information, but don't let them drive the car.
What happens when the situation, is very real? Like, someone's just gone through a really painful divorce, or, and they have got those very intense emotions and feeling like there isn't Does that make sense? It's the
It makes
situation is real.
total
It's
sense.
not perceived.
It's a great question. And I'm so glad because you're actually rounding out this conversation by asking that. So when trauma initially occurs, like what we do in cognitive behavioral therapy is we go event, emotion, and the thing that mediates is thought, or the cognitive processing is what we call it. But the thing is that when something initially occurs, it doesn't process slow. It goes right for your emotional jugular vein. So if you get assaulted, if someone breaks up with you and you didn't see it coming, that's going to go right for your emotions. And you have to allow for that. So don't become
Yes.
hard on yourself for having deep and powerful feelings when something goes horribly wrong. But if that same person, like say, your partner dumps you unexpectedly, that same person in 10 years is still feeling that way, chances are they have cherished certain ways of thinking and viewing that have kept them in that condition. And
Mm,
because the emotions are designed to heal, just like the body is designed, God puts those healing dynamics and properties in our bodies and in our emotions. They will heal if we let them heal. But if we
mm,
insert these untrue thoughts that aren't really based on reality, or just shut out God and his love, which is a big part of it. People try to do life without God. Yeah, they're going to be depressed.
yeah.
But that's just because they're not letting the truth in. And the truth is that God loves you. And over time, with the boyfriend thing I went through, I mean, over time, I met Jesus and I found a love that would never leave me, a love that would never fail.
Mm,
It's made all the difference. Not that I haven't, at times in my Christian experience, had to deepen my understanding of that and clear some things out of the road so that could sink down into me more deeply. But
mm,
that was basically a, a rational basis for me
mm,
experiencing emotional transformation. There was actually a being in the universe that loved me personally and
mm,
unfailingly. That was
mm.
huge.
So if somebody's like caught in this emotionalism, there's a situation going on at work or in their family life or in a relationship, and they want to react out of emotion to it.
Yeah.
How does that person recognize, like you said, where there's the cognitive kind of thinking is going wrong? Do you know what I mean? Because if you're stuck in your own head, that's all you know. This is how you think, this is how you react. How does
Yeah.
someone start taking a little step into, hey, I need to change the way I'm thinking here?
So I think you described a couple situations, like a terrible situation at work, something at home. Sometimes if we're in a constant state of emotional distress because of something going on around us, now sometimes people don't have options, but if you do have options, it might be important to choose to get out of that situation. I remember being in a bad work situation and um, feeling like I had to stay there because I didn't want to fail. And then I realized
Mm-hmm.
that that was stupid and I should get out of there because it was killing me.
Yeah.
And when I did it, it was so empowering. It was like, I can actually, a lot of times we do things over and over the wrong way, or we submit ourselves to bad circumstances just because we haven't fully realized that we're free and we can make
Yeah.
choices. God has given us
Mm,
the option of choosing the direction of our lives. And I recommend doing it in partnership with Him. But don't let that partnership become a thing where you're somehow imprisoned by your present circumstances. Maybe you're not. Maybe it would
mm,
be perfectly legitimate to, hey, I don't want to be here. This is painful and distressing, and I'm not
mm,
helping anyone by staying. I might as well leave. That can be a very
mhm.
freeing thing. It was for me when I was in a bad work situation. I just learned to go, okay, I'm going to do something else. So, number one, if you can change your circumstances, like you may not be able to, but if you can, think about that. And then if you're in a circumstance that you can't get out of and you sense that your way of processing it is making it worse, I would say find counseling, because
Mhm.
either counseling or some kind of group support where you can discharge some of the emotional distress that keeps building up in your system and find a safe place where you can be yourself and be accepted and be validated. And that is, you can find that in one-on-one counseling. Of course, there's hit and miss to some degree, but counselors are by and large trained to be accepting and non-judgmental. So you can find it in counseling, but also you can find it in groups. The Abide Network that I run is a biblically Christian-based counseling network. We not only do personal counseling and coaching, but we do groups and a lot of different kinds of groups, workshops and intensive trainings, and then also free telephone support groups. And it's all on our website at abide.network. And I highly recommend you get involved with Abide because there's so many resources. And the cool thing about Abide is it's a community. I mean, it's a community of people, and it's a place where it's okay to talk about your emotions. It's okay to talk about your mental health issues, and people help one another. And the Lord has really done a great thing. I started out just wanting to set up a counseling network because I was getting too many referrals because I have these books and people would read the books and they'd want me to be their counselor. And I was like, I can't take all these clients. So I started handing them off to different friends of mine that work in the counseling field. And then the Lord took it and grew it into this community over 10, 12. Now it's been like 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So I would say if you're in a really hard situation and you're kind of, in your view, not processing a difficult situation well, maybe adding to the distress by your own way of processing, counseling can be a good way to learn new skills. And just talking to another person, seeing it through another person's eyes can be very, very helpful.
Yes.
Is that helpful? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, Jennifer, that is really amazing. I could go on and on talking to you. You've got so many things that I'd love to have conversations with you about. Even, your doctorate that you're doing at the moment about trauma sounds deeply fascinating. And I'm sure you've got a lot of very enriching information. So I hope I will be able to have you back on in the future. Awesome. Yeah. But we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, it's great to chat with you.
Thank you for pressing play on the Grow Your Dreams podcast. Just like plants need water and sunlight to grow, I think in the same way, we need encouragement and inspiration on our own journeys of growth. Stay connected with me on Instagram over at Grow Your Dreams podcast, and also check out shaylinfair.com for show notes and more inspiration.